Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you. I want to start off with the reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional. Please seek one out in your area. And as always, if there isn't one available in your immediate area, do look at the internet. There are those that are available in your state to be able to help you even at a distance. All right. So today's podcast, and the individual we're going to be talking with today was someone I met. Well, I shouldn't say. I first saw them we'll hear about this more in our second piece. But I went to a training, which they were one of the health co-facilitators on. And as I was listening to them answer a question from someone else in the class, they talked about a very important subject that I think we're still developing more material on around neurodiversity and relationships. And it's like, yes, we need to do a podcast on this because this is not something that I typically see, and let alone, with the work I do, especially here in Silicon Valley, the likelihood of encountering a situation like that is highly more likely. And I'll also say for many people of color who have also been unrecognized in their neurodiversity, and then they end up with a neurodiverse partner as well, there's also a lot of angst and a lot of struggle to just even get that sorted out. So who we're going to be talking with today is Dr. PsyD, Erin Findley. They are a licensed psychologist based in Napa, California, who leads her private practice with compassion and a commitment to making a difference in the lives of neurodiverse individuals, couples, artists, high performers, and those with single incident complex and or developmental trauma. In her clinical practice, Dr. Findley uses a highly attuned, radically accepted, bottom-up approach that is built on attachment theory and neuroscience. She is a certified brain spotting consultant and therapist. She is an HSP, which is a highly sensitive person, knowledgeable therapist. She has received advanced training in emotional focused therapy for couples and is trained in both classic EMDR and attachment focused EMDR. Beyond her professional credentials, Dr. Findley is a champion for social justice and actively participates in ongoing learning, self-reflection, and advocacy efforts spanning more than a decade. Her commitment to decolonization, both personal and within her practice, reflects her dedication to equity and inclusive mental health services. This dedication extends to her professional efforts, driven by a profound commitment to enhance the quality of life for autistic and other neurodiverse individuals. She employs a multifaceted approach, educating both the general public and professionals across various disciplines, while striving to improve access to high-quality neurodiversity affirming services and supported. Dr. Findley has also pioneered professional spaces where like-minded colleagues can learn their methods of incorporating neurodiverse affirmative principles into brain spotting, couples therapy, and psychological assessment. Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, Dr. Findley.
Welcome, Perry. Thank you. Please call me Erin.
Thank you, Erin. You have an impressive record, and as
I sound so cool when I'm listening to my bio.
Oh yeah, well, it's that aspect that we never think about it for ourselves, but when someone else has got to read it, it seems like, oh yeah, we want to be around that person. Oh, that person is us.
Oh, that's me. Oh crap.
Yeah. So, as I like to ask everybody, can you share with us a bit of how you got here, whatever you're open to sharing? How
I got here. Well, how far back do you want me to go? I'm autistic. Well, I could take all day.
Well, whatever you feel comfortable sharing with us in brief.
Sure, fair enough. So let's see. I came to psychology later in life. I started with I thought I was originally going to be an opera singer, a professional opera singer. And while I still love music, it became clear to me in my mid-20s that that was not really the profession for me for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And at that same time, I was experiencing some of my own mental health issues, and that got me to my first therapist, and then that got me
Mm-hmm.
interested in psychology. Um, and so several years later, after life got a little bit more balanced, I guess, I was able to do some deep self-reflection, do some volunteer work to kind of try on the idea of being a therapist, and then ultimately went back to school for my doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
So I have degrees in music, but I also have degrees in psychology. Um, and let's see. So I found out that I was neurodivergent through an exploratory process where I initially identified as an HSP,
Mm-hmm.
highly sensitive person. And then over time, as I started to learn about the more masked and camouflaged versions of autism, I realized, oh, that's me. Can I
Mm-hmm.
curse? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, that's
Will
fine.
you, okay. I have a bit of a potty mouth. If you need to bleep it out, I understand. Um,
I have an explicit
so,
tag, so.
okay, perfect. Excellent. All right. So yeah, so over time, I learned that I was neurodivergent at first as an HSP, then as an autistic person, as a highly camouflaged autistic person. Um, and then in parallel, um, I had, I'd gone through a divorce before I started my psychology program. I started dating someone new in my psychology
Mm-hmm.
program, ended up marrying him. And in the process of getting remarried, I got really interested in how couples work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that started out my deep interest in couples work was we did a premarital preparation course, which my husband did not want to go to, but ended up loving it so much he volunteered us as
Mm-hmm.
helpers in the future ones. It's like okay, um, but uh, but also I talked about it with a friend of mine who was in a simpler life stage, getting remarried, and the response was like, "Oh, I don't know, that's kind of interesting for you, but I don't know about for us."
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, "Wait, why would you not want this?" And so that sort of plugged me into, wait, how do couples learn how to do things well? Um, and I've always been interested in people and relationships, so it was really a natural sort of outgrowth
Mm-hmm.
of my interest. And then as I learned more about myself as a neurodivergent person and started to see some of the places where my husband and I were not connecting because, like, for example, we would be talking in using similar words, but meaning very, very different things, profoundly
Mm-hmm.
different things. Um, I started to think about how do couples function who are neurodivergent. And side note, I use neurodivergent to
Mm-hmm.
describe individuals and neurodiverse to describe groups.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my languaging. Um, and so I so I went to really dig in with some of my couples and realized that there were a number of things that I did with my couples that I didn't even realize that I was doing that helped them, especially the neurodivergent ones, or
Mm-hmm.
the neurodiverse couples, I should say, because often it's mixed neurotype, to help them in ways that my colleagues weren't doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when I would talk with my colleagues, they would be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so like, how did you even think of that?" And I was like, I don't know. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
so that has blossomed into really digging into how do couples who have different brain styles find ways to communicate, to connect in ways that feel authentic. There's also the trauma piece that wraps in,
Mm-hmm.
because most of us who are neurodivergent have experienced some degree of developmental trauma just by being neurodivergent in a world that's not accepting of neurodivergent people.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and that's only one possible angle of intersection, right? There's whole other sets of intersections that make things even more challenging and potentially confusing for couples. So really digging into how do we help couples in a way that honors both people, and that to me is the soul of the neurodiversity
Mm-hmm.
movement, is to recognize the value and um, to affirm the okayness
Mm-hmm.
of different brain styles, right? Like if I say words and mean them quite literally, and you say words and mean them quite symbolically, neither one of us is right or wrong, right? It's just different. And
Mm-hmm.
and if we don't know it's different, that's going to land us in a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But if we know that they're finally this, different, then we can start to find ways to meet in the middle and to bridge the gap
Mm-hmm.
in ways that we couldn't do if we didn't even know it was an issue.
Exactly.
So that's a huge passion project for me.
Oh yeah, and that's what I was overhearing you talk about during the training. Is like, okay, we need to do an episode on that because I know also in my
Nice.
living, so especially with the way the Bay is set up, you're in basically northern San Francisco Bay with Napa. I'm in the southern
Mhm.
portion with Silicon Valley, with
Right.
the heart of the tech industry area here,
Yes.
and it's just like, can I throw a quarter and not hit somebody with who's on the spectrum of
I
some
mean,
degree,
you
for whether it's
could maybe,
yeah,
depending
and,
on how busy
and
of a
then
street it was.
yeah, and then how many of them are also coming into admitting that they need to work on therapy and now realizing, oh, they're actually on the spectrum. When I ask, is like, have you ever been tested? And this also comes up
Right.
very much when I'm dealing with clients who did not grow up in the US to have that
Yeah.
recognized. But then
Yeah.
I also get a number of clients that are have dealing with ADHD and they're struggling with
Yes.
their partner. And it's like, well, hang on, what? And I ask the question is like, so what did you get told, or how have you been supported around your ADHD? It's like, oh, I just take the medication. It's like no lifestyle educational
Hmm.
training whatsoever. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so we got to actually address that so that you can now work on your
Right.
relationship. And I
Yeah.
have had one or two clients who were also, as they actually we started addressing the lifestyle issues, come to realize, oh, their partner is also neurodiverse. And
Yeah.
there's entirely another level of struggling around the sense of feeling intimacy, feeling supported
Hmm.
that goes on. And I know for a fact, if I go looking for the literature on that, I'm only going to find the literature on essentially someone who's quote unquote, and I'm going to put in the quotation marks, folks, neurotypical, dealing with a neurodivergent and neurodiverse individual or individuals.
Right. And usually that literature is all about how the neurodivergent person is broken and messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm not saying that there aren't particular challenges for a neurotypical partner of a neurodivergent person,
Mm-hmm.
but no relationship is, 100% at fault, 0% at fault. That's just not how the math works. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's very much a shared thing, and the more that we lean into that shared experience of, I do it this way and this is what comes naturally to me, and you do it that way and that's what comes naturally to you, and can we find a way each to reach across the gap?
Mm-hmm.
That's when we start to see really successful couples and really successful relationships. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is. Could be family, could be work relationship, could be romantic.
Mm-hmm. And that gets into so much about our society, which prioritizes the romantic,
Yeah.
and that there's still whole other sets of relationships that are going on, even to the
Right.
standpoint of what we're looking for when we're looking for a partner. I often say to some of my clients, it's like, okay, our society is very good about teaching about what the physical characteristics of your partner and perhaps the monetary, but what's the emotional type? You're going to live with that a lot longer than the other two.
Right. How good of friends are you?
Mm-hmm.
right? Can you laugh together, right? Like those are important things, and it's not just about, whether my bits like your bits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although that is important too for many people, and not
Oh yeah.
everybody, but for many
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Never saying that isn't, because especially, and also with what we're seeing with our economy as well, where are the resources for surviving? But again, making sure that you're surviving because you want to survive together, as opposed to surviving
Right.
together because you need to. And what is that now opening up into more destructive qualities?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm? Yep. You
Wait,
just got to
I,
pause.
I need to
Yeah.
close the door because
Yes.
I just realized my person is here. Hold
Yes.
on.
We have our four-legged furry friends that are also around. So we want to respect those as well.
Thank you. We have a pest control service that was supposed to come out today, and I think they probably just arrived.
Ah, well, again, the pests and trying to, especially with the rainy weather we're having today.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to work, but
Mhm.
it's not up to me.
So I want to definitely talk more about the aspects of dealing with the neurodiversity between couples, but I think you also hit on a couple of other areas that I'd love for you to define a little more for our audience, which is talking about the
Sure.
masking. And I know
Oh, yeah.
masking is a very big difficulty for a lot of us, but most especially
Yes.
for women, and
Yes.
the aspect of dealing with the on the spectrum as well.
Yeah, so masking is a trauma response at its core. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to be really clear. Masking is not the same thing as code switching, but I do think that they're kind of under the same umbrella
Mm-hmm.
of trauma responses that are geared towards helping a person survive in a hostile environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, when a person masks, they are doing whatever they need to do, often unconsciously, to be able to fit in an environment that um, is hostile to them. So it might be something like, um, adopting an accent. For example, I have an ear for accents, but I also will often slip into an accent when I'm talking with somebody, not because I'm like making fun of them, but because there's a survival piece of like I need to fit in with this person. When I was
Mm-hmm.
living in the South, particularly, ooh, I was putting on the sweet Southern belle, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was safer for me to be seen the same way as other people were being seen in those scenarios. Um, but that's just one small aspect of it. It's about controlling body motions. It's about, you know, highly monitoring how much you're talking. It's
Mm-hmm.
about whether or not you're wearing clothes that you can tolerate, right? Like there's all these things that go into the survival, of someone who visibly doesn't fit if they're being fully themselves, to try to put themselves into that round peg instead of being the square box that they are or the star
Mm-hmm.
shape that they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and the net effect of that is it's a form of chronic trauma, um, because of being so restrained, because of having that hypervigilance of like, I'm monitoring the scenarios around me, I'm monitoring the environment around me to make sure that I'm constantly adjusting in the way that I need to in order to be seen as okay by the people around me. And
Mm-hmm.
it has physical repercussions, it has mental health repercussions, and it has social repercussions. Because, by the way, when you're masking, nobody gets to know who you actually are. They get to know the version of you that, that got created
Mm-hmm.
to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is also an aspect that for many people of color operate under that same stance as well.
Right. And then, I'm a white person. People aren't maybe going I don't know if they'll see my picture or not, but I'm a white person, not a person of color. And so, so I don't have that intersection personally. What I understand from my colleagues of color and my clients of color is that the intersection of code switching and masking has a multiplication kind of an effect. So it's not just one, it's not just the other. It's the combination is its own thing. And there are some white therapists who don't get that. So I just want to put that out there.
Which is part of some larger developmental issues for our field and societies and such.
Also,
and so that then becomes that standpoint of whether or not we're just even bringing in the POC standpoint of it. We're looking at the aspect of people walking into a relationship with trauma, which is not unheard of in any respect, that there is a lot of trauma going on in our world, and there's a lot of relationships that have gotten based in trauma. But it's adding in that neurodiversity standpoint of how do you deal with two different people who are neurodiverse, dealing with some degree of survival and developmental trauma, now trying to have a relationship with each other.
Yes. Yeah. And it's tricky sometimes because often those couples will end up either highly escalated where the fights just, it doesn't take much at all. And the fights are explosive, right? And I'm not talking necessarily about physical, although that can certainly be the case, but just lots and lots of anger and rage and unkind words, and each person setting off the other, and neither one really knowing why or how it got as bad as it got. And then on the flip side, you can also have couples who are basically roommates, who are shut down, who are like, oh, I like you. And, and I'm so worried about doing anything wrong that I'm going to tiptoe around you. And of course, we can have everything in between, and we can have the typical pursue withdraw dynamic. That's does exist, but there's a volatility that comes often with couples where one or both people has developmental trauma, and that volatility can go either into fire or into ice.
Okay, so we have to ask. So we're going to have to ask for some more definitions just for our listeners.
Please. Yes.
One, what is the pursuit withdraw dynamic? Because I know what that is, but our listeners may not, unless they're a therapist. And the second one is, could we also define developmental trauma a bit more? Because again, someone's not. We want to make sure that everyone's having the best understanding in finding that bridge.
Absolutely. So the pursue withdraw dynamic is a very common one in couples. It's when one person is inclined towards having the argument all the way out, having the conversation all the way out, get back here, figure this out, let's get this resolved, right? And the withdraw side is, let's just settle down. Let's just get our cool heads going on. Let's just, take some space and let the temperature drop so that we can talk calmly. Let's be logical about this. The problem is, right.
Not in a defense state.
And the problem with this is both of those are actually forms of emotional overload or dysregulation. And when a person who is a pursuer tries to force the withdrawer to sort of come back here and have the conversation, and I'm going to say we, because I'm a pursuer, We will often use not so kind, warm, and fuzzy methods. So we might, use criticism. We might use unkind words. We might use a really sharp tone. There's a little panic sometimes, sort of mixed in.
May even attack their sexual expression, not sexual expression, their sexual identity.
Oh, sure.
For things like emasculation or effemination.
Yeah, exactly. An attack is usually like, I'm trying to poke through your wall to get a reaction from you, because right now I can't get a reaction from you, so I can't tell you're there. And that's scaring the shit out of me. Right? Because my biggest fear is I don't want to be abandoned. Like, that's typically a pursuer's deepest fear. Typically the lowest. But then withdrawers, understandably, are not keen on having their defenses poked through. So those walls that they already put up because the interaction had gone sideways, those walls get thicker and bigger and stronger, and they pull back more. Because, by the way, the underlying message that the withdrawer is getting for the pursuer is, you're not good enough, right? And often withdrawers need to know that they are good enough. They're often quite self-critical underneath. And their pursuers often, in the height of disconnection, will inadvertently sort of poke at that wound, right? And so the withdrawer then puts more distance, puts more space, tries to get calmer, tries to, I don't want to get dysregulated and yell at you because it's going to be so damaging if I do, that I'm going to hurt you and hurt us. So I'm going to pull back so that I don't create a disaster. But the problem there is that the pursuer then gets the message that they're being abandoned and that there's something bad and wrong with them. And so both strategies, which are, I say strategies, but it's not a conscious strategy. It's a nervous system level strategy. This is not something anybody chooses. I just want to be 100% clear about that.
This is not a chess match.
No, this is a nervous system level reaction that gets more and more automatic the more activated it gets. So each person, the pursuer and the withdrawer, they each trigger the other's attachment wounds. And when that happens, the negative cycle that keeps them disconnected escalates and gets worse. And so then it either can flip into just attack, or it goes into that, two ships passing in the night.
Right. So I think this is a good place for us to take a break so that people can let that digest. When we come back, let's talk about what is developmental trauma and continue to put all these pieces together as we can. Perfect. So I've been Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, here with Dr. Erin Findley. So think about these things, folks. Start considering what's going on in your life, what you may also be watching your family members go through, especially if you've dealt with family members who have often been considered they're odd, they're special, they're unique. They might be very much on the spectrum. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that shortly.
A little birdie told me Voice America is on X. Follow us at Voice America TRN.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it, so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Become a member of VoiceAmerica.com. It's easy, and best of all, it's free. Start out by going to our homepage or any of our channels and click register at the top. Once you've created an account and signed in, you can create your own custom library, opt into our newsletter, search by show, host, guest, or topic of interest, or browse millions of hours of content across all of our Voice America radio channels. Membership gets you more. Visit VoiceAmerica.com today to get started and tailor the listening experience to your taste.
Live up to your fullest potential. This is the Voice America Empowerment Channel.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Erin Findley, and we're continuing to talk about neurodiverse relationships between neurodiverse individuals, as well as just some understanding about what is neurodiversity in multiple forms, as well as what is developmental trauma. So, as we started in the other section, let's define a bit more about developmental trauma for people to understand why that's coming up and showing up in the pursuer-withdrawer relationship, why it's influencing masking in the variety of different degrees.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not only present in the pursue-withdraw scenario. It's more like it's commonly present in neurodivergent individuals because the thing about developmental trauma is it's different from PTSD and complex PTSD. So regular PTSD is like the single incident, like you get into a bad car accident, right? Or any number of the other horrific things that happen in the world. But it's like a one-time shot, right? Or it might be something that happens a couple times in a row, but it's kind of it's discrete. It's limited to a certain set of events and a certain time and a certain place. Complex trauma is more. It's like PTSD repeatedly throughout a number of different scenarios and through different stages of a person's life. Those intersect and sort of create a different matrix than just standard PTSD. And then we have developmental trauma. Developmental trauma occurs in the context in folks who are 0 to 18. And, or I should say, is formed in folks during the 0 to 18 years and has far-reaching effects afterwards, and may not be identified until afterwards. But the seeds, the roots are laid in the early part of the person's life. And it's like complex trauma in the context of an absent or abusive caregiving scenario. So it's a combination of, protracted trauma plus attachment trauma. Does that make sense?
It does. For me, it does. We have to, again, add a little more for our listeners, especially about the understanding about attachment trauma versus the non-attachment trauma.
So when you think about attachment, like these are the bonds that connect us as humans, right? Whether like I'm attached to you as a colleague and as a friend, I'm attached to my dogs because I love them dearly and they love me back, right? I'm attached to the mailman and the guy next door, even though I don't know them very well, because we're humans sharing this human experience. So there's a wide, exactly. So there's a wide variety of attachment bonds, but it's all about being connected to each other and acknowledging that we're connected to each other and that we influence each other. And the three key questions for attachment are accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. So are you accessible to me? Can I reach out to you and you actually pick up the phone? Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the first question, right? The second question is, do you respond to me? Do you actually pick up the phone and not only say, hey, Erin, how are you? But are you like actually having that conversation with me? And then that engagement is like, how much of you are you bringing into that conversation? So if you're having, if you and I are chatting on the phone and I'm like telling you about some horrible thing that just happened and you're, flipping through your phone watching a YouTube video
Mm-hmm.
while I'm talking to you, you're not going to be engaged. You're not going to be attuned. And so these questions are paramount to understanding what it means to be attached. And
Mm-hmm.
then attachment trauma is when one or more of those questions is answered no in a very important or significant way, right? So if I've been through a horrific experience as a child and I want to reach for my parents
Mm-hmm.
to get some support or care, and they're working 24/7, they're not there,
Mm-hmm.
much less, do they respond or engage? They can't be there to be with me to help. And that's going to erode my trust in them because every time I need them and every time the answer to "are you there" is no, I'm going to reach out less and less and start to learn I've got to deal with this on my own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that over time, and in significant, when it happens in significant ways, that creates attachment trauma, especially if there's no repair. So parents are not perfect. Nobody here is perfect. Perfect is not achievable
Mm-hmm.
as a human being. But what we can do is notice when we mess up and fix it, right? And that means fixing our behavior and coming back and really tuning into the other person's experience emotionally and connecting with them and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out a path forward. So it's not just, oh, I'm sorry. It's help me understand, like, I let you down and your experience matters to me. So please tell me what happened for you when I let you down and how that continues to affect you now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then how do we make a plan? How do we come together and make a plan to have things go differently next time? Right. That's a
Mm-hmm.
very brief sort of version of an attachment injury repair. But if the repairs never happen,
Right.
right, then that attachment bond gets frayed and torn. Right. And then that becomes attachment trauma.
And that continues to be something, whether you're on the spectrum or not, is an issue
Oh yeah.
everybody is dealing with. We just made it becomes more complex again when you now are on the spectrum and trying to have that with somebody else who's also on the spectrum.
Well, I think interestingly, when you have an autistic couple, and I use autistic instead of on the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
because on the spectrum is often used in a stigmatizing way and kind of euphemistically. So
Gotcha.
FYI.
Mm-hmm.
When there's two autistic people, and they often speak the same language, so there's often a way to bridge the gap a little bit more easily than when you have an autistic person and a non-autistic person, or an autistic person and an ADHD person, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But where attachment trauma and developmental trauma comes in the neurodivergent experience is that socially our environment in this country, at least in the United States, is geared towards a neurotypical standard of behavior and engagement. And when people don't fit that for whatever reason, then attachment becomes more difficult because maybe like the parents don't recognize that the kid has sensory sensitivities. And so they put the kid in clothes that are super cute, but the kid is super uncomfortable the whole time. And so then that's going to lead to distress, both because of the sensory experience and because of the lack of attunement from the parents, realizing that this is a problem for the kid.
And then the kid has to choose to mask just to keep the parents happy.
Correct. Or the kid is shamed into masking. Why are you being such a brat? You should be quiet. That kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, your grandmother sewed that for you, or bought that.
Your grandmother sewed you for that for you. Can't you just be grateful for one day? Why is it such a big deal? And the answer is, well, it's like, brushing fireweed on my arms, but thanks. Okay.
Or sandpaper, burlap, whatever it is, something that is uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so there's this lack of attunement and partially, one of the neat things that's come out in the more recent research is understanding the differences between social signaling. And the research has largely been on autistic, non-autistic, but I think once the research starts to branch out to ADHD, non-ADHD, and other differing neurotypes, we're going to find the same thing, is that social signaling is better when you're talking about people who have the same neurotype than it is across neurotypes. So that research is just starting to sort of make it out in the last several years into the more common knowledge. And I think we're going to find that in other areas as well, because ADHDers have their own way of doing things. And if I look at someone who's an ADHDer and I think, oh, well, you don't prioritize me because you're never home on time, right? Well, that, first of all, ADHDers often have time agnosia, or the lack
time
of
blindness.
Awareness of time. Yeah, I don't use time blindness, sorry, because of the blind community's preference for not using time blindness, because that's, so I use time agnosia, which is lack of awareness of time is what that means. And so many ADHDers have lack of awareness of time. And so when that happens, the person who shows up 6 minutes after they said they were going to be there, the ADHDer who shows up 6 minutes late, is actually, that's kind of a pretty big victory. But for someone who heard, a literal statement of a promise of I'm going to be there at this time, right? That cross neurotype communication now is a problem, because the ADHDer who is doing their best to show up on time and who made a really good effort now feels like a failure. And the autistic person who heard the literal words coming out of the ADHDer's mouth and took them literally, because that's often what autistic people, most often what we do, we will, there's that gap between what I thought I could expect from you and what actually happened, and how our neurotype signaling goes astray. Other things like eye contact is another really obvious example. For autistic people, often eye contact is not a comfortable thing to have or to hold for any extended period of time. A masked autistic person would make themselves, but then there would be an internal stress increase because of that sort of forced, sort of forcing themselves into doing something that's neurologically problematic.
Which is just because you're making me think about something that's going on with one of my clients, where the idea for then their date, they want to have relationships, but some of the settings and so forth that they're trying to be more sociable in require very much eye contact, the social back and forth of the if like you're in a bar and you're basically flirting with each other across the bar. That's all very difficult for them to have, and they want to have a relationship, but they are struggling to be able to have those initial meeting signals.
Right. Unless they have someone who is autistic, who has knowledge of autistic signaling, who knows, hey, when you're looking over there, you're actually focusing, like that's how you focus on what I'm saying. Right? That's not you being distracted. That's actually how you focus, because in order for your ears to work, your eyes need to not be doing eye contact. So yeah, that, and like when I'm working with couples and I'm having them, there's a thing in EFT where we often will have folks directly say things to their partners that they've just told us to kind of help their nervous systems practice saying the difficult thing to their partner, because it's different to say it to a therapist. And when I ask my autistic clients to do that, I don't ask them to look at their partner. I ask them to direct their energy toward their partner. Right. So their body posture might not change at all, but their demeanor changes because they know they're directing their attention and their energy to their partner. Right. And so this is one very simple way that we can adapt for a neurodivergent member in a couple to work with their neurotype instead of against it. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it just also brings up to how many therapists and couples therapists are not aware of that and are not thinking about in that concept, especially when depending on the partners have presented that they are in the neurodiversity aspects. What do you have to think differently about the training and methodologies, what we've been hammered into us, and why it's not an aspect of treatment resistant or client resistant.
Oh God, no.
The methodology is not designed to include this type of thinking.
Right. One of the biggest pointers that I would love to give everybody out there is to question your assumptions. We all make assumptions. It's part of being human to a degree, because we can't take every data point in the world because it's just too much, right? And so our brains and our nervous systems have a tendency to sort of lump information together to make the world more digestible. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're struggling with someone or you're struggling with an interaction, the first thing that we can do is question our own assumptions. So even just like, am I understanding you? Like if you say, Erin, the sky is blue, and I think I know what you mean by that, then I can run with that and make all kinds of assumptions about what I think you mean. But I might actually not be getting your point at all. You might be telling me the sky is blue, but I don't know why.
But you're noticing it's got some, because I think I've used this metaphor. Yeah. One partner sees it as a sort of a red blue. The other one sees it as a green blue.
Right, exactly. And so maybe it's, so maybe you have a conversation about, why does it matter if it's red, blue, or green, blue? And if we don't know that we're dealing with red, blue, and green, blue, then we don't even have a framework to start from in terms of figuring out where the conflict is. Another thing that's really important is knowing physiological, I'm going to say vulnerabilities, and how they impact mental health. So I'll give you a really great example. When I am hungry, my brain turns off. Like my husband has described it as like Elvis has left the building. Nobody's home. I have a hard time stringing words together. I have a hard time comprehending what he's saying. Like my my whole, like, everything just goes offline
Mm-hmm.
when I'm hungry. And I'm also more irritable. Okay. Um, and early in our relationship, the only thing he would notice would be the
Mm-hmm.
irritability. And when that happened, he would think, oh God, she's pissed at me. What did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. And he would get all defensive
Mm-hmm.
and completely miss the other signals that I had. Now, once we figured out that's a moment where he needs to hand me a banana, give me a kiss, and tell me to come back to him in 10 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
problem solved. Right? So, what could have been perceived as an attachment issue actually was a physiological issue interfering with our ability to attach in that moment, in my ability to attach in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his to a degree too, but mostly mine, right? And figuring out that there was a physiological solution that needed to happen first, that was really, really important, because then
Mm-hmm.
the attachment system can come back online because there are physiological resources available for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in the absence of other information, we as couples and people in relationship tend to default to attachment explanations if we don't have another explanation. So if he didn't know that my brain had just turned off, then his initial assumption would be that I was mad at him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if I have another couple that I was talking to the other day where she has an auditory processing issue. And so when she would hear him speak but couldn't make out what he would say, she
Mm-hmm.
would say, huh? Or what? But for him, that was super triggering. Like, what? I'm not important enough to pay attention to?
Right.
Right? And the answer is no, that's not what it is. There's a physiological challenge here that we need to pay attention to, right? And if we can then say, okay, say that again, please, or I'm sorry, my ears just turned off for a second. Can you say that, one more time, or something like that? Then all of a sudden there's an alternative explanation to our attachment is offline.
Mm-hmm.
And now that attachment issue that was brewing no longer exists, because
Right.
it's not an attachment issue, really. It's actually something else.
Such
So
as the aspect
question
of,
your assumptions.
yeah, such as that example of, like, if I'm talking to you, I need to make sure you've got eye contact to know that that attention or that dynamic or that energy is on me, as opposed to you're turned away and I'm talking to you, and you're not paying attention, not because you don't want to be paying attention. The system hasn't gotten engaged from the biological standpoint.
Well, so that's certainly a neurotypical way of interacting. For an autistic
Mhm.
person, you might verbally sort of do a pre-engagement, right? Because if we're looking away, we might be looking away because our interest is caught by something else, but we might be looking away because we're actually trying to listen to you. And so if you do sort of a pre-engagement where you're like, hey, Erin, is this a good time to talk about something with you? Or, for me, I'm a very touch accessible autistic person. Not all autistic people are. So for me, a great pre-engagement is just like a gentle touch on the arm or something like that, because that gives me the clue that I need to orient to you if I'm not oriented to you. Not that doesn't work with all autistic people. So make sure you check with your friendly local autistic person to see what their comfort level is around touch and other versions of pre-engagement, and figure it out for them, right? Because that's the other thing. We're not cookie cutters, right? What works for me and my nervous system is not going to work for the next autistic person's nervous system necessarily. You have to find out for that person.
And the
Yeah.
biggest importance is to start asking about those differences when you're working, especially for those who are going to work with couples, whether you're dealing with a mixed neurotypical and neurodiverse person, or a pair of neurodiverse individuals as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Got to ask for that. I'll say this again, as I think I said to you before. It's like, oh, we need definitely material written on this, because I do not see, I don't see that much of that out there. And I also look at, again, what we've known about our profession now and needing to move forward with its thinking and its operations to fit where we are now as opposed to where we've been in the past.
Yeah. So, not so secret is that I am working on a book proposal. And with any luck, that will, go in and get some traction, and and I'll be able to take some of what I've learned and put it out in a form that the general public can use. My first sort of vision is a book for the general public, and then maybe something for therapists second, because I really want people to be able, in terms of access and in terms of equity, I really want people to be able to have some of these basic tools on their own, right? Like, you don't need to pay a therapist however many hundreds of hours to find out you need to have a, banana before you have a conversation, right? Or, carb of your choice, right? It doesn't have to be a banana. But like that, you don't need a therapist for that. But if you know that, like, there could be a physiological thing that's interfering with the connection or the conversation, and you start looking for that, then, most people will be able to start putting some pieces together and say, oh, what if we try doing it this way instead of that way? And then, once all of that's in place, then we can really dig into the attachment level stuff and the trauma, and really tune into those things. Because the stuff that's not an issue is just out of the way, right? And so I want people to be able to take those steps on their own as much as possible, and then get support when they really need it, but not before, because
right,
empowerment.
Yeah, that's a big one. So if folks wanted to work with you or talk with you more, especially for consultation, where can they get a hold of you?
So the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, erinfindley.com. That's ERIN, F as in Frank, INDLEY.com. And depending on when this podcast comes out, my website is under a bit of redesign. So, but the contact page still works. So they can still reach out through the contact page. I have an amazing assistant. Her name's Melissa. So she's the sort of first person who will get those messages, and then she'll pass things on to me that I'm able to handle or help with. I don't currently have room for new clients. But I do have some room for consultations, and I'm just really, I'm really excited to see the couples, the couples work and supporting mixed neurotype couples moving forward. In a variety of people, I'm seeing this interest start to really bubble up, and that's exciting. So
hopefully we'll have some more thanks to this episode.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Your information will be included on the contact information for this page as well. So I want to thank you again for being here for this episode, and definitely think about these things when you're looking both with your clients, but also when you're thinking about working with your partner, and your partner has a difference in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
So this has been Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Erin Findley. So stay tuned. We're going to have more coming back, especially from Dr. Erin here. And be well, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.